The sacred intellect sees through the heart's eye, illumined by divine light, while the modern mind stares outward, blind to the real. One remembers the origin, the other forgets there is one. Inspired by Seyyed Hossein Nasr, The Garden of Truth.
Welcome to Bookscape Epic Reads, where we dive deep into the world of popular books, exploring timeless classics and modern bestsellers alike. Join us for in-depth reviews, insightful discussions, reflections. Let roll.
In the sacred garden where truth blossoms, no path is more radiant and more perilous than that of divine love. Seyyed Hossein Nasr, in The Garden of Truth, invites us to contemplate love not as mere emotion or fleeting affection, but as the very fire of being, the force that unites all multiplicity into the unity of the real. Divine love, al-hub al-ilah, is not something we possess. It is what possesses us, overwhelming the heart, softening the soul, and unraveling the threads of selfhood that tether us to illusion. It is love that drives the soul out of the prison of the ego and into the embrace of the eternal. To love God is to die before dying, not in despair, but in ecstatic surrender, not in denial of the self, but in its transfiguration. In this episode, we explore how the ego, nafs, that illusory core of separation and self-interest, is not the enemy to be slain in combat, but a veil to be lifted by love. The Sufi path does not command the annihilation of the ego through force, but its dissolution through recognition, recognizing that we are not autonomous beings, but reflections of the one light. Nasr reveals that this love is not born in us, but awakens us. We do not climb toward God. God draws us to himself. Love is the thread woven through all levels of reality, from the cosmic to the personal. It manifests as beauty, mercy, longing, and ultimately, union. And yet the path is not without fire. The ego does not yield easily. It clings, resists bargains. But through prayer, discipline, contemplation, and above all love, true love that burns without consuming, the ego is stripped bare. What remains is not a hollow space, but a purified heart, capable of reflecting the divine. In this episode, we walk with Nasr through the stages of this transformation. We reflect on how divine love elevates knowledge into wisdom, worship into intimacy, and law into presence. We ask not just what love is, but how it undoes us in the most sacred of ways. This is the garden secret, that in losing ourselves we are found, that in dying to the ego, we are reborn into reality. That divine love is not a metaphor, it is the axis of the cosmos and the soul alike. Let us step deeper into this love, not with fear, but with the trembling awe of those who begin to see what they were always meant to become. In the journey through the sacred garden of truth, after love has humbled the ego and opened the heart, we arrive at the radiant fountain of rifah, gnosis, the inner knowledge that is not learned, but unveiled. Seyyed Hossein Nasr, in The Garden of Truth, teaches us that rifah is not simply intellectual comprehension. It is the illumination of the soul, a knowing that is both participation and presence. It is to see with the eye of the heart, and in that seeing to know the real, not from a distance, but from within the intimacy of being itself. In the world of modernity, we are taught that knowledge is power, an accumulation of data, theories, and formulas that we own. But in the sacred worldview of the traditional metaphysics that Nasr restores, knowledge is not something we grasp. It is something that grasps us. It is a light descending from the divine, and only the purified heart can receive it without distortion. Rifah is not opposed to reason, it transcends it. It is not anti-intellectual, it is supra-intellectual. It is not the negation of thinking, it is thinking with the soul. It is not merely to know about God, it is to know through God, to be known by Him. In this episode, we enter into the mystical heart of Islamic gnosis, where the intellect is wedded to the spirit, and knowledge is inseparable from virtue. Nasr brings us back to a time when philosophy was not divorced from sanctity, when wisdom, ḥikmah, was the fruit of silence, prayer, and vision. To attain rifah is not to climb an ivory tower, but to descend into one's own depths. It requires discipline, humility, and above all, receptivity. For the divine light cannot be forced, it must be welcomed. This sacred knowledge does not just inform, it transforms. It reshapes the very structure of our awareness. The one who possesses rifah does not merely see a tree, a sky, or a star. They behold the signs of God in every leaf, every shadow, every breath of wind. The cosmos becomes a scripture, and the soul a mirror. Here, knowledge is sacrament. It is remembrance, dhikr. It is unveiling, kashf. It is the lifting of veils that separate the knower from the known. It is not about adding layers, but about removing them, until only the light remains. And this light does not blind, it clarifies. It does not overwhelm, it transfigures. In rifah, we come to see that knowing is a form of being, and that the highest knowledge is love, made luminous. As we move through this episode, let us listen deeply, not only with the mind, but with the soul's ears. Let us ask not merely what we know, but how we know, and let us remember, all true knowledge comes from the real and returns to the real, like light to the sun. For rifah is not just a gift, it is a calling, and to receive it is to step into the radiance of the garden itself. As we venture further into the garden of truth, we arrive at a fork in the path, one that divides not only ways of thinking, but entire visions of reality. Seyyed Hossein Nasr, in his profound and urgent critique, draws a line between two forms of intellect: the sacred intellect, al-aql al-qudsi, and the modern intellect. These are not merely historical stages or cognitive tools. They are existential orientations, shaping how the human soul stands before the real. The sacred intellect is not just reason, it is illumined reason, a faculty that is rooted in the divine and open to the transcendent. It is the intellect, understood in its original metaphysical sense, not confined to logical operations, but encompassing intuition, insight, and spiritual discernment. It sees with the light of being, and through that light, all things find their order, meaning, and harmony. The modern intellect, by contrast, is a truncated mirror. It has severed itself from its source and turned inward, defining truth as what can be measured, manipulated, or empirically verified. It reduces the universe to data, the soul to psychology, and the sacred to symbol. In doing so, it loses the vertical axis, the sense that all knowledge points upward toward its origin. In this episode, we explore the metaphysical catastrophe that Nasr calls the fall of the intellect, the forgetting of the intellect's sacred roots. Modern man in this worldview has become a titan of technology, but a pauper of wisdom. We have sent probes to distant planets, but cannot answer the questions in our own hearts. We know how to split the atom, but not how to unify the soul. The sacred intellect is not nostalgic, it is eternal. It lives whenever and wherever the soul is attuned to the divine rhythm of the cosmos. It is the intellect of the sages, the saints, the seers, those who saw with clarity because they saw through humility. The sacred intellect begins in reverence, not in doubt. It begins by acknowledging that there is something higher than itself. Nasr reminds us that this is not merely a philosophical debate, it is a spiritual emergency. For when the sacred dimension of the intellect is forgotten, truth becomes opinion, beauty becomes taste, and ethics become law without light. The modern intellect may build civilizations, but it cannot save souls. To reclaim the sacred intellect is not to abandon science or reason. It is to restore their proper place, to reunite knowledge with wisdom and wisdom with the divine. It is to reawaken the perennial vision that reality is not brute matter, but a cosmic theophany, a revelation of the real, shimmering behind every form. In this sacred vision, to know is to be responsible. To think is to worship. Every true insight is a form of gratitude, a spark of remembrance, a step back toward the garden. So we are faced with a choice. Will we continue to think only about things, or will we remember how to think through the sacred, toward the real? Will we use the intellect to dominate the world, or to revere it? The sacred intellect does not impose. It invites. It calls us home, not just to higher thoughts, but to higher being. And so let us walk this path, not to escape modernity, but to transfigure it. Let us think not as machines, but as souls. For only through the sacred intellect can we remember who we are and why the stars still shine.
Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe.